I never saw New Orleans before Katrina. By the time I had dropped out of art school and followed my then girlfriend to Louisiana, it had already had several years to recover from the damage that the hurricane had caused, though most people said it still had a long way to go. Crime, buildings that still needed to be torn down or rebuilt, toxic mold. I was always told New Orleans was still a ghost of what it had been before. That may have been, but I still loved it. I'd be nervous about setting up as a street artist. I'd do caricatures and try to sell some of my real art on the side while my girlfriend set up nearby, selling handmade jewelry and doing palm readings. I figured we'd starve or someone would run off as soon as we tried to set up, but it wasn't like that. There were hard times, sure, but overall we had a good time and made enough to get by. Even when we split up and she moved back to Michigan, I stayed. I made a life there, and I loved the city and my friends there more than any I'd ever known. My best friends were a married couple that were street performers themselves. Peter and Magda had come over and introduced themselves not long after we came to town 4 years earlier. They tended to work the same part of the French Quarter we did, him doing street magic and her reading tarot. Peter was a bit of a surly asshole, but Magda made up for it by being really sweet and kind. And to be fair, from the start, both of them helped us figure out the unwritten rules of street work. The places you didn't go, the things you didn't do, what could get you hassled from the cops or the dealers or the gangs, what could make you extra money if you were smart, and what could get you robbed or killed if you were stupid. When I was single again, I took to hanging out with them more. And over time, I'd gotten used to Peter's weird mood swings. He wasn't a bad guy, he just had a lot of anger. He'd get pissed off and fixated on random shit once in a while. But if you ignored it, he'd usually drop it after a day or two. So when he started ranting about a new magician in the corner, I didn't pay that much attention at first. By the end of the next week, though, I was starting to get concerned. We were all sitting in the park one day eating lunch when I asked him what the big deal was. When Peter turned, he reminded me of a gargoyle, his shaved head gleaming in the afternoon sun as he scowled angrily in my direction. "What's the big fucking deal? The big fucking deal number one is that it's money out of our pockets, isn't it? The big fucking deal number two is he's a fucking ponce who thinks he's better than us." Magda was already shaking her head and touching his arm, but Peter shook her off with a withering glare. "Nah, our friend here wanted to know what the big fucking deal was, so I'm just educating him." He turned back to me. "He comes in here setting up just 2 blocks away from us, stealing our customers with his flashy bullshit." I was torn between being confused and irritated. What's he doing, exactly? Is he a bad magician or something? I thought acting like I gave a shit might calm Peter down, but my question only seemed to make him angrier. He glanced back at Magna with another hard look. "Guess it depends on who you ask, right? Think he's a cheap fuck, right? Using money and gadgets instead of skill. Some bullshit like he's in Las Vegas instead of on the fucking corner. All tourists think it's great, of course." He spat idly. "The fuck they know, right? He's down here on a fucking lark with his whatever he's got. We don't have to be. We're people like us. Scrabble and suffer." What's that? Peter trailed off into a Morris silence. When I looked questioningly at Magda, she smiled and rolled her eyes a little as she patted Peter's head. "He's a good magician. Been around a couple of weeks. Keeps to himself mostly. We went over once we noticed him and watched his act for a few minutes. It's really good stuff." She paused as she felt Peter tense under her hand. "Different than what we do, but still, it's good. I don't know nearly as much about the magic stuff as Pete, but I know some, and I haven't been able to spot how he's doing any of the tricks, even close up." Peter raised his head again. "He's slick enough. I'll give him that. I've been back over a few times, watching for the cracks and the tells. His tricks don't got no angles. No plants in the audience either, I can see. Haven't seen him use a pole, slide, M5 or even a palm, even though he should be using all that. I can't see where he's hiding anything either. He uses a little wooden table and, well, I checked it one day while he was off taking a piss. Magna jabbed him in the ribs. You did what? You don't mess with other people's shit, Pete. Especially magicians. You taught me that. He winced and looked sheepish. Sorry, babe. I know. Just wanted to know. I don't get how he's doing what he's doing, and it pisses me right off. He's a fucking tosser, right? He snorted and shook his head. Fucking shut-eye. I looked at him, and then Magda in confusion. Shooting a last glare at Peter, she nodded at me. A shut-eye is what magicians call someone who believes their shit is real. They get so good, or they get so fucked up, that they think they're doing real magic instead of tricks and illusions. Peter glanced at me apologetically. Sorry, mate. Don't mean to be an ass. Just been making me a bit mental. I'll leave off. And for a while he did. I had never seen the other magician except at a distance, and despite Peter's complaints, he'd never really set up to that close to the areas we'd frequented anyway. I guess that's how I'd have forgotten he even existed. Till one day when I cut over a street and saw a tall man standing behind a small, black wooden table in one of the small courtyards as I passed. Realizing who it must be, I decided to watch for a bit. There was a crowd gathered already, watching intently as the man appeared to pull a small ball of fire out from behind a little girl's ear. She let out a delighted shriek and recoiled. Her mother wrapped a protective arm around her as though afraid her child might get burned. But the fire was between his hands now, slowly rolling back and forth between the magician's fingers like it was a small red balloon instead of a tiny star of heat and light. I stood at the edge of the crowd for the next half hour or so, increasingly amazed as I watched him move tirelessly from miracle to miracle. He played with tarot cards, read people's minds, floated objects out of a man's pocket and a woman's purse in clear view of everyone. But the most incredible thing was, when he asked the little boy what his favorite animal was. When he said elephant, the man simply nodded and asked 5 people in the crowd to give him a small object that they didn't mind parting with for good. 3 gave coins, another gave a hair clip, and the last gave a broken pair of sunglasses. He somehow took that and made it into a tiny junkyard elephant in a matter of moments. It wasn't a trick or a swap out. His hands had blurred and he shaped the disparate items together, but when he was done, I could still see the pieces of a quarter, the rubber earpiece of the sunglasses, the black metal of the hair clip. That was amazing enough. But then he told the little boy that before he gave it to him, he wanted to show him a secret, to let him know that he didn't just have a pile of junk, but something that really was an elephant, at least in its heart. The magician cupped his hands around the small elephant sculpture for a moment, obscuring it except for a hole at the top, putting his mouth to the opening his cupped hands had left. He breathed in twice before lifting his hands and stepping back. There was a tiny, living elephant on the table. It wasn't a trick, and everyone knew it. People gasped and then fell silent as they watched in amazement. The little elephant walked around on the table, looking at the audience and giving out a barely audible trumpet as it moved further down the line. After it completed 2 circuits, the man swept it back up into his hands and held it out for the boy, once again as a small, but remarkably accurate, sculpture. It was then, as the wide-eyed boy took the sculpture and held it carefully, that people began to cheer and applaud. The man smiled, nodding humbly before moving on to the next bit of magic. Part of me wanted to stay and see more, but the twisting in my stomach forced me to step back and head out of the courtyard instead. It wasn't right. What he was doing, I wasn't some expert or anything, but it didn't feel like a trick or an elaborate illusion. It felt like something alien, unnatural, antagonistic to my understanding of how things worked. It felt like real magic. I didn't mention what I saw to Peter and Magda. I tried to forget it myself, but I couldn't. Instead, I just made sure I avoided any trips to areas he was performing at. Live and let live and all that. But I didn't want any part of whatever it was he was doing. Unfortunately, Peter didn't agree. That fucker's bleeding us dry. This was 3 nights later. We were all hanging out drinking. I could tell Magda was just about done for the night, and I was ready to go home before I got too far gone, but Peter was still going hard. The more he drank, the madder he got. I want to see what makes that fucker tick. I bet. I just fucking bet. If I pushed him, he'd crumple like fucking paper. Tell me how he does that shit. If I could pick up even 1 or 2 things. He glanced over at Magda, who had started to softly snore against him. Just a couple of his big tricks. We'd be set. We wouldn't have to scrabble, and I could get some proper gigs from time to time. He licked his lips. You know, I asked around about him. Name's Jeremy. He's been squatting in an old house in the lower ninth. Bet if I caught him unawares, he'd give up all kinds of goodies. I didn't want to start another argument or rant, so I just shook my head and stood up. You're drunk, man. Go to bed. The dude will get tired and move on like most of them do. And we'll still be here kicking ass, right? He looked at me solemnly for a moment before nodding. Yeah, we'll still be right here. The next day, Peter and Magda were no-shows. I figured at first they were just sleeping it off, but when they didn't answer my texts and didn't show the following morning, I went over to check on them. My stomach sank when I saw their front door was partially open. Had someone robbed them? I needed to make sure that if they were in there, they were. I saw as soon as they pushed the door open. Their bodies were stuck to the far wall of the living room somehow. A thick coat of what almost looked like webs holding them together. But as I stepped in, my eyes and mouth wide with horror, I saw it wasn't webs. It was plastic and fabric and plaster from the wall itself, stretched over them in places, as though the apartment had started to eat them before thinking better of it. Parts of them I could still see were naked and unmarked, so I wasn't sure if whatever had pulled them into the wall had killed them, or if it was something else. But I could see clearly that they had felt it when it had come. Their faces were both bizarre and clean, except for what I mistook at first for a dusting of dirt or drywall. As I got closer, I saw it was neither, but fine pinprick clusters of something black. It looked like tiny black rocks were growing out of their pores in places. I would have been more bothered by it at the time, but I couldn't get away from their eyes. They were wide open, frozen and staring as they screamed in silent agony. It was as though my best friends had been turned into monuments to pain and fear, and as I looked into their eyes, I tried to tell myself that they were gone, that they no longer suffered, that maybe this wasn't even really them in the first place. It was a trick, after all. That would justify this unnatural horror being able to exist, that would explain how their eyes had turned so black and shiny. The police talked to me, of course. It was ruled an unsolved double homicide and quickly forgotten. And at first, I thought about looking into it myself. I asked about Jeremy, where he might have lived, where he'd gone to since Peter and Magda were murdered. But then one day, I woke up to find a small red box sitting next to my bed. When I opened it, there was a card lying on top of purple tissue paper, wrapped around a small object. Taking out the card first, I read the 4 lines there. You sought the truth. It sought you as well. Now, hand in hand, you walk into hell. My hands shaking, I reached into the box and peeled back the tissue paper. It was the little elephant. My name is Jason Mariah. I'm in my mid-20s now, and I have been contemplating writing this out, but I have to tell someone. This is a warning to anyone thinking about doing this. Don't. From what we discovered, everyone has a certain time that has been planned out for them. You can't cheat death. I mean, you can try, but you won't get very far. I've been wanting to tell this story for a while, wanting to share it with someone, anyone, but I haven't been able to. I'm afraid someone will call me crazy and not believe me. The idiotic thing that I did as a desperate college student that had been haunting me. I was in college getting a medical degree, and like all college students, broke as hell. I just got fired from my old job and couldn't handle not having a source of money. I was looking forever on websites and newspapers for any job that I could get. I had seen a few applications for low-paying jobs until I scrolled upon a job that needed someone with medical experience, and it was paying a lot. I took my shot at it. It was perfect. It was quite an interesting and vague job description, only telling the money you would be getting and the experience needed for the job, plus a brief explanation of what you would be doing there. A few days later, I got an email back and got accepted. It said to meet them at a warehouse on Saturday at 3 o'clock. I was so dumb back then. How could I go there without questioning it at all? Like, seriously, going to a random warehouse in the middle of nowhere without even telling anyone either. I was driving for about half an hour when I pulled up to the warehouse. It didn't look too sketchy when I looked at it, but I was still nervous. I walked to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I tried to call the number they gave me, but they didn't pick up. I was about to walk away when I heard them ask who I was from the other side of the door. Jason Moriah. I was supposed to be here at 3 o'clock, I said nervously. They opened the door and was shocked when I went inside. It was mostly white and looked like a professional building. You would not expect it at all, looking from the outside, to look so good on the inside. They walked me into a room, and someone in a lab coat was sitting in a chair on the opposite side of the desk. "Hello, Jason," she said. Hello. "Welcome to Locust Laboratories. You might have wondered what this place is, and what we wanted you for. We do experiments here. Not all are the most legal. We hope you don't tell anyone what we're doing here, as we're paying you a lot not to." Yeah, I won't," I said in a low voice. That's good to hear. We're going to put you on an assignment with a few other people. We are close, but we can't crack the last final code. We hope you can help us with that." What the fuck? What the fuck did I get dragged into? She handed me a contract, and I should have read it. God, I was so dumb back then. I quickly scanned it, then I signed it as quickly as I could, because I wanted to get the hell out of there. "Are you sure you don't want to read it fully?" "No," I said. I got out of there. As soon as I shut the door behind me, I ran to my car as fast as I could. I was going way over the speed limit and got to my apartment. I was looking everywhere around me. I was paranoid that someone was following me. What did I get myself into? I thought about it all night. So many questions. Who are they? What do they want? What are they doing? I had no idea. I knew it was too good to be true. They were paying a lot. I thought it was just a hard job or something, but no. I got myself into a bad situation that I had no idea how to get out of. I met up with them again, out of fear of what they would do if I ghosted them after they told me about the illegal acts they were doing. They told me what they were doing. Immortality. They were trying to find a way to make humans live longer. They put me on research assignments and made me run errands. I had no idea what I was getting. They just had me grab boxes from strange locations and bring them to the warehouse. The whole thing was sketchy. I finally worked my way up and was helping make the solutions that we were testing on rats. I met someone, too. Fiona. She and I were very close. We started dating after a few weeks. She told me that she had worked there for over a year. She told me about all the other sick and twisted experiments they were doing, testing how far the human body can stand different toxic solutions and torture. They also did 6 psychological experiments. They all wanted out. They couldn't handle it. But we were all under contracts and terrified of what would happen if we tried to leave. A few months passed and I made a breakthrough. I produced a solution that made rats live 2 or 3 months longer than they should. I was put at the top of the project. As much as I wanted out, I put too much time into this to not see it through. They gave me a raise. I was making so much money. I had a girlfriend and was the leading manager of a big project. I was at the peak of my life. But it went downhill so quickly. We moved into human experiments. We couldn't give it to someone healthy, otherwise we would have to watch them throughout their entire lives, and that would take way too long. So we found Lewis. He had aggressive cancer, only had a week to live. He was perfect. He was desperate. Nothing else had worked. And so we approached him. He thought we were batshit crazy, but he wanted to try anything. He was out of options. We started by giving him a small dose. The doctors were clueless. They were almost certain he was going to be dead within the week, but he started to get better. His cancer was slowly going away, but was still in bad condition. We upped the dosage and he was doing great. We were so happy. Months and months of research and hard work, and we finally did it. We cheated death. That was when things went downhill. Lewis wanted more. He kept wanting to up the dosage. We were giving in to his demands, but his family called us and said he was acting very strangely, so we put him into a room for observation. We started asking him questions, what he was feeling, asking him if he noticed any changes, etc. But it got horrifying. He said he couldn't feel anything. Only when we gave him the dosage is when he could finally feel something. That's why he wanted more. Then we noticed he got more and more depressed, started cutting himself, and still could barely feel anything. But what got us horrified is when he started to hear voices. He told us he could hear things like, "What? Why are you not dead yet?" And, "You should be dead by now." We couldn't understand it. Where was he getting this from? He tried to kill himself. He couldn't handle it anymore, but he couldn't. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't physically do it. Our solution was stopping him. We tried to stop him, protect him any way we could. Locked him up in a padded cell with nothing, but it didn't help. Then one day, when we went in to question him, he escaped. He got out of the room, took scissors from the first desk he saw, and slit his throat. We all watched him slowly die, and there was nothing we could do. It took 15 minutes for him to die, but for the average human, it would only be about 10 or 30 seconds. When we asked the girl who went in there to question him, she said that he had the voices saying, "You should be dead. You need to die soon, or we will be there to get you ourselves." I couldn't believe it. I didn't understand. Within the week, we were all fired, but I was still dating Fiona. I wanted to tell someone all the sick things I saw from that place, but I couldn't. They were way too powerful of an organization. I knew it would be a very bad mistake to do that. Even the things I witnessed at the place just broke me. I was scared to die. I didn't fully understand it, but I was still very scared. A few years later, I went back. I had to. It was haunting me. Even years after, I couldn't stop thinking about it. As I drove by, I didn't see anything. The windows were boarded up, door wide open and empty. They just ran. Those fuckers screwed us up, did horrible things, and then fled. I couldn't believe it. The dumbest thing I did in college that ruined my life. Something I couldn't do anything about. Under a fucking contract. But I don't care. They can't track me. I'm using a cheap computer on a coffee shop's Wi-Fi. Even if they do find this, they probably won't care. I have nothing on them. No evidence or recordings. Absolutely nothing. But someone needs to hear this. And I hope this can be as to some kind of lesson, too, to people who were as desperate as me back then. Remember, don't do anything that seems too good to be true.
I was, at some point, a normal 19-year-old girl. Had 2 parents, a quiet little brother, a cat that often behaved more like a puppy, and lived a normal, unremarkable life. Even when I was reduced, I was still relatively normal. Still as human as anyone else. The normality of my life persisted, even as my life was irreparably altered. When I had been walking home from campus that day, I attended a community college just down the road from my neighborhood. I didn't think anything of the cooler than usual air, or the odd way the swirling leaves seemed to avoid settling in my path. I didn't take note of the strange absence of vehicles on the road, despite traffic typically peaking at that time. I don't remember what I'd been thinking about. Things were eerily serene, the entire day having an uncanny weight to it, a gravity that pulled all higher thought into the depths of your mind, so that you only vaguely felt and perceived things. During that walk, I probably wasn't thinking about anything at all. When the car arrived, when I felt a grill shatter my ribs, I do remember thinking, wow, rude. And even as I lay atop my backpack, legs and arms bent terribly, I thought still, that was really fucking rude. As my mind caught up to the events and state of my body, the expected panic and terror set in. My body started its rapid, neurotic firing in a desperate attempt to preserve my failing body. The driver got out, and hope began to burn within my tachycardic heart. I was subsequently snuffed out when I saw the calmness on his face. People who are on their way to help a dying person don't have calm faces. Apparently, I said this aloud, or something to that effect, because he smirked a little before he picked me up and packed me into his car. 2 days later, I was dumped at the college parking lot, fixed up from the crash, but broken in other ways. I hadn't slept since the hit and abduct, so I passed out once I was certain I'd wake up somewhere safe. When I did eventually wake up, I didn't speak for 3 more days, and after that, only to my mother. I didn't speak to my father, which hurt him, and for that I'm still sorry. My brother was aimlessly belligerent, only vaguely gleaning what happened, yet enraged that anything had happened to his older sister. My cat avoided me, either instinctively sensing that I needed space, or just out of animal obliviousness to human emotion. Or maybe it knew I was broken, damaged, and didn't want to be around anyone. I stopped going to college, never officially dropping out, but never planning to continue my attendance. I got cards almost daily for months, mostly from peers, most of whom I hadn't said a word to. The college, though not at all culpable, excused my fees for that semester and established a program in my honor which provided students with rides home from staff and vetted people of the town. The police conducted a town-wide investigation, but uncovered nothing, caught no one. My memory of the events following being hit by the car have completely left me, save for a few hideous images that I refuse to recall. The worst part isn't what I endured, but what was taken from me, that I won't ever get back, that will forever torment me. I'm not angry. Holding on to feelings as intense as anger is too much effort these days. I had physical therapy for a few weeks, but my wounds, those sustained during the crash and after, healed remarkably fast, and my limbs were all in working order by the next month. I had been kept in usable condition while in the care of my abductor. Life went on. People entered and exited my life. Years piled up like stones on a cairn, laminating the death of what I was. I eventually had to move away. The relief and fiery love in the eyes of my family gradually turned to wariness, and that wariness to dread. I left them wordlessly in the night, had taken to avoiding me, and my brother, older then, spent the nights out with his friends. 8 years have passed since I left, and my mother has died. I considered going to the funeral, perhaps disguised, but ultimately decided not to. To go back then would be even worse. And I'm sure I would have been blamed somehow for her passing. She died of a heart attack, and they say grief or rage or any feeling strong enough can induce them in the literally weak of heart. It was best that I stayed away. I sometimes look at myself and see another person in the mirror, another me from another time. But I know it's who I am, who I've always been, and who I'll always be. I'll never get back what he took from me. And although I may be initially pitied, people always eventually come to see me as damaged, broken, and I guess they're right. I go for walks at night, a lot. You could say it's pretty foolish, considering what happened. But that had happened in daylight, out in the open, so I didn't see the dark, and those within as dangerous anymore. I was, of course, proved wrong when I was mugged, and upon finding me without money, shot in the chest. It was a weird feeling, like a fast, spreading warmth within my body from the point of impact, until even my fingertips felt the sensory shockwave. That was rude. The gunman's drug-fired eyes narrowed, and he uttered a hollowed voice. "What?" In response, I rose to my feet. I'd fallen without even realizing it, and repeated myself. He ran off, firing behind him as he fled. The first shot burned into the night, nowhere near me. The second struck my shoulder. One bullet hole was manageable, but two ruined the whole sweatshirt. I had to throw it away. I walked home as unfeeling as ever, took a shower, and turned on the TV. A movie was playing, 30 Days of Night, about a pack of ancient vampires ravaging a town in Alaska. The vampires made a sort of howl scream after a kill, when wounded, or to call out their kin. I tried to mimic the sound, but I hadn't been talking much and my voice was pretty weak. It was more similar to the raspy exhalations of some tomb interred thing. The scariest part of all of this, everything I've gone through, is that while watching that movie, I felt myself subconsciously rooting for the vampires. Not because I'm a horror fan and wanted to see them hack apart B-list actors, but because I felt aligned with them. I've been vague about what was taken from me. I'm sure you've had your assumptions, but whatever they are, they're wrong. Something was subtracted. I was reduced. I was broken. But I also gained something. I was enhanced and reforged. He took my humanity, but in its place, he gave me everlasting life, nigh invulnerability, and resilience to all known diseases. I don't fear the light, or yearn for flesh, or have an aversion to religious totems. But I also never feel happy, or sad, or elated, or disturbed, or anything that even the weakest human has the capacity to feel. I am fortified, but hollow. 12 years later, I still look 19. 12 years later, The sight of his unaged daughter would terrify my father, send my brother fleeing. 12 years since I was abducted, trained, and repurposed, given a task, and I've still yet to make any efforts towards accomplishing it. He could impart his abilities to me, but in that transaction, I hadn't been instilled with a desire to do the same to others. He wants to repopulate our kind, but I won't help him. I'm content with watching us in films and movies, reading about us in folkloric tales and dubious anecdotal accounts, but I won't increase our numbers. I won't become so monstrously inhuman.